been in this series, Change My Heart, O God, Transform My Life. And from the beginning, I said this maxim. If you want to change your life, if you want your life to change, you must change the way you think. And that's a leadership principle I developed some years ago, studying leadership and in the ministry of Christ. And I realized that Jesus, who was a great example of a great leader, when he went around teaching and preaching and ministering, all along the way, he was teaching Israel first, but then us. Different way of thinking. How many times did Jesus say, this is what you say, and I say to you? And he gave us different ways to think. So we've been in this renewal services since the beginning of the year. It's a little different. We cut off our worship in the beginning a little shorter so that there's plenty of time for prayer at the end, and there will be again today. But changing the way we think, changing our views about success, changing what we think is important to God. Remember that last week? The lesson wasn't so much about what's important to God, but what's not so important to God. Because we can make a lot of things important, right? Today it's changing my mind about what I think about myself. Y'all look in the mirror, and you can't get away with what's staring back at you. It's inevitable, and it changes. And it changes. The picture of yourself changes over the years. And sometimes you look at yourself and say, who is that person in there? Some of you might not be so pleased. I'm not talking about spiritually here now. All I know is as I look in the mirror, there's a lot more of me than there used to be. What does God think, though? You're talking about what you think, but when you think about what yourself is we take our cue from the Lord about what he thinks of us. And he says this in Psalm 139:17. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. Just bathe in that just for a moment. The thoughts of God for yourself. But we're Bible people. We read the whole Bible. So contrast that verse with this one. Okay? Genesis 6, verse 5. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. That with that. Wow. How do you deal with that? And I want you to look at that verse. There's no escape clause in there. It's looked at he was looking at man, and that every intent, every intention, every motivation, everything we had, everyone, all of them, was only evil. And continually. All the time. There's no escape clause in there. And he was sorry he made us. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry I have made them. It's ironic that he was going to destroy all the animals because they didn't do something wrong. Man did. So how do we reconcile this idea with the historical event when God created mankind? You go back a few chapters, and he was described as good because everything that God created was good, including the formation of man. And it says right there, and he was good. It was a good creation. How did it happen? Because this was within a couple thousand years of that event. It's what man became because of the fall. You see, man was created good, but because of the fall, because of initial sin, this is what happened. It transformed man from what was good into someone whose heart intentions were only evil all the time. And don't for a minute think that the people of that generation were any different than this generation that lives on the earth today. The flood didn't change the hearts of man. It didn't. There's a question here. Is man essentially good? Obviously, what I just said, you probably said, well, we know what you think, Pastor. But is man, in his essence, essentially good? What does humanity think of itself? You ever heard of humanism? Secular humanism? Humanism is this philosophy that's been around for several hundred years and has dominated politics, sociology, social engineering, governments, education, hospitals, medicine, whatever. Humanism actually dominates it, whether you know it or not. And humanism, they have this philosophy, the man himself, without God, is the measure of all things. So humanism says. Humanity is supreme, and this is the humanist view about this. That humanity is essentially good and can solve all of its problems without divine intervention. In other words, humans are good people, and we will find our way through social engineering and medicine and doctoring and good governance and science and all these things because man is essentially good and we don't need God. That's humanism. So if you're a Christian out there and just casually say, well, I'm a humanist, that's what you're saying when you say you're a humanist. Secular humanism. Doesn't mean we're not humanitarian. There's a big difference. But that's what and it dominates our culture and society. And it's this belief. I would guarantee you that our Prime Minister is a humanist at heart because he believes, with his philosophy, that if he can change society by changing laws and governments and finances and economies and whatever, and change the laws so that everybody's equal and they love one another, that, because we're all really good people when it comes right down to it. And there's a reason why there's bad. You see? There's a reason why they're bad. It's because of society. And if we change that, we can fix that. What do individual people think of themselves? This is a prevailing. What do people actually think of themselves when they look in that personal mirror? Not the physical mirror exactly, but the personal mirror when you look at yourself. Actually, here's a good question. What do you think of yourself? Today, what do you think of yourself? There are many people who think very lowly of themselves. They have low self-esteem. It's not a desirable position. Nobody wants someone walking around with low self-esteem. And there are many causes of it. But here, there are many teachers, teachings, books, and seminars about how to have better self-esteem. Guaranteed you go to the library, go to the bookstore, and it talks about human development, self-development, psychology, self-help books. You will find the prevailing things in those books, and it'll say, don't feel bad about yourself, don't beat up. You are really a good person, and you're lovely, and you just discover the good person inside you, and discover all of that. And when you look inside yourself, you'll find you're really a good person, and that's where you should have self-esteem. There's a huge problem, though, with that. Huge. Self-esteem teaching is self-defeating. It's self-defeating. And here's why. If we try to convince ourselves of our own goodness, but are honest with ourselves, we are confronted with the reality of who we truly are, because inside we know who we are. Now, I know I'm talking to mostly saved people, and we know you can get to the end of the story here. But let's just think of the natural man for a second here. The natural man, whom we think sometimes like. You can have all the people in the world tell you you're a good person. You can have all the books in the world tell you how to figure out that you're a good person. You can go to all the counselors in the world to tell you, work this thing out, but you're a good person. The problem is we all know how we think in the natural. And when we look at ourselves and know ourselves inside, we know that that's not exactly true. Because sometimes we see in our hearts what God saw. Tough stuff. But it's true. And so when we think of all these humanistic ideas and books about self-esteem or whatever, I'm not going to have a message about how do I have self-esteem or whatever. That's not what this is about. Philosophy lesson per se. Because we want people to feel better about themselves. But the humanist philosophy that dominates, that tells us these things, will never accomplish it. Because people come back to the thing and say, I know it's a lie because I know who I am. Is low self-esteem because of a guilty conscience? It can be real challenging sometimes, I've got to tell you. Yesterday they just elected a new leader in Saskatchewan, a new premier. I think it's No something. And it was interesting, and he's the new premier. But in his story back 20 years ago, he crossed the highway there, didn't stop, wasn't drinking, and someone got killed. And here the new premier, this happened, an accident. He was charged without due care and attention, wasn't criminal, it wasn't accident, he was careless. But he says, I still carry the guilt to that day. Because that happens. And it's not true. I mean, people do that. Even George Bush II, his wife was in a car accident, killed somebody years and years and years before that as well. So these things, people carry guilt. But is that alone the cause of low self-esteem? Like some people say, well, that's why you have low self-esteem, because you still feel guilty, and you should quit feeling guilty about yourself, etc. Or is it because of a poor social environment? In other words, people have low self-esteem, poverty does this, and I don't disagree entirely with how it works, but when I was a kid, we were dirt poor. Dirt poor. And it was embarrassing to go to school when you didn't have clothes like other kids, or when you didn't have food. It wasn't you were just hungry and freezing. It was the embarrassment. One might say, I had low self-esteem. In fact, in elementary school, I don't know why I have to tell you this, but I might as well tell you so to start it. But I was the kid that everybody picked on. They talk about bullying today. Where were they when I was growing up? My nickname was Snot Rag. They play a game right in front of me. And if somebody touched me, they say, oh, I got your fleas. And they go play tag. Oh, you got Joey's fleas. I'll tell you, pretty hard to have good self-esteem when that's going on. Right? You felt like a loser. Is it because of that, though? If we fix society, if we fix all the bullying, will that help everybody have a good self-esteem? What about bad parenting? We say it all the time, well, the parents are at fault for that. Low self-esteem. The parents aren't nice to them. I believe that we have to be loving to our kids. You've heard me say it before. You tell your child he's stupid enough times and will soon start to believe it. Is that itself? Let me ask this. If we fix the externals, will we all then become good people? Or is the human condition inescapable reality? You see, we know who we are to a degree. But the Bible teaches us the truth about who we really are. Let's start with the hard stuff, though. I know it's good to say amen.
No, I said nothing.
Yeah, but it starts with Romans 7 and Paul's dissertation about not only himself, but all mankind. He says it like this. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, fleshly, sold under sin. For what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will do, that I will to do, that I do not practice. But what I hate, that I do. Let me paraphrase in English, because his construction there is a little complicated for us with the grammar. See, basically saying, I don't understand what I'm doing. The things I want to do that are good, I don't even do them. But I end up doing the very things I hate. Huh? My little brother, I was in Alberta after being away for a time and came back home, and I stayed in summer there. And my little brother, he came running up to me because he knew I was a believer or whatever, and he said, Joey, smack me. I said, why? Because I swore I said a bad word. You basically see that I don't want to say those things, but they come out of my mouth. And then Paul says, if then I do what I will not to do, in other words, if I do what I don't want to do, I agree with the law that is good. But now it is no longer I who am doing it, but sin that dwells within me. He's not trying to make excuses here, okay? He's trying to describe what's going on. It is sin that is with me. Now it's no longer I am doing it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, a little bit good lives. No, he doesn't say that. I know that in me, that is in my flesh, nothing good dwells. I wonder if he was thinking of the Genesis passage. For to will is present with me, but how to perform what is good I do not find. For the good that I will to do, I do not do. He repeats himself. But the evil I will not to do, that I practice. Now, if I do what I will not to do, it is no longer I who does it, or who do it. He's actually correct in the grammar there. But sin that dwells in me. I find then a law, that evil is present with me. It's in me. It's in me. A lot of people think this is Hitler, right? It was so evil. How could anybody be like that? But then was that famous Jewish witness at the war crimes that fell to pieces. And when asked why, he said, I knew that I was also capable of that kind of evil. Evil's with me, the one who wants to do good. For I delight in the law of God according to the inward man. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin which is in my members. It's hopeless. And then he says this, O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? Paul is describing the fallen nature of humanity. And since the fall, humanity has inherited a fallen nature. Ever since Adam, when he sinned, his nature became fallen. And it's not only spiritual and psychological, but it's in our very bodies. And today we inherit that from him. All humanity. It's the human nature. And it's more than just a spiritual or religious idea. It is the undeniable truth that man, while created good, is innately sinful. And here's the pain of it. Nothing we can humanly do can change that. There isn't a book, there isn't an injection, there isn't a teacher, there isn't a psychology, there isn't a religion. There's not even everything we do as we live as Christian lives that can change the fact that we have sinful human nature. Nothing can be done about that. Human. Nothing. And the fallen nature of humanity is evident everywhere in the world, every moment of the day. I guarantee you right now, at this time, throughout the world, there are people being killed, persecuted, tortured, raped, kidnapped, absconded with, attacked, violated. It's everywhere, every second of the day. That's the reality of natural mankind. This is the world that the humanist lives in that says, if we change everything else, everybody will be good. Thousands of years of human history, with all of its evils in every corner of the world, is indisputable evidence. I read a book, it's not a devotional book, it's This Day in History. And, every day goes back hundreds of years or thousands of years and says what happened. And I am surprised of how many times throughout history there was massacres of Jews. We often think of Hitler being this great. It didn't start with him. It had been going on in Europe, in particular, for over 1,000 years. By people of villages, by the Dutch, by the Germans, by the French, by the British, by all kinds of peoples, with every political stripe, including Christians. Because they had demons, and that was evil. And been going on for thousands of years. No goodness of the heart or good deeds can erase the reality of the fallen nature and its results. You can't do it. And it cannot be explained by and treated as a result of social and environmental issues. See, social ills, like poverty, whatever, may shape or even initiate the development of the character flaw. But the root cause is sinful nature. People will say, well, an alcoholic is born that way and something triggers it. You know what, I won't debate that with a doctor, but I do know this. The real root cause is a sinful nature. Yeah. The drug addiction comes. And so, again, the humanist wants us to feel sorry for them because they're sick. And they try to treat it as a sickness. It's a sickness. That's why we no longer enforce the laws against drug consumption, because people are sick. That's what society says. And if we fix the sicknesses, fix the causes, because man's essentially good. That's the idea. A perfect society cannot create perfect character. You know that? Because of the fallen nature. And see, all men, it cannot be diagnosed as a medical condition. There is no medical cure for a sin nature. Because if there was, I'd go pay for the pill. Or the injection. Huh? I mean, I love my Lord, my Savior, I know that. But if somebody says, here's an injection you can take, and you'll never think or do anything bad again for the rest of your life, sign me up. 50 grams, I'll borrow the money. Can't do it. All men and women must come to truly know themselves. This is changing the way we think. You see, and the Bible teaches us, all have sinned and can fall short of the glory of God. All of us, all of them. All of you, all of me. All have fallen short. If that's the case, then what can be done? What can be done about this mess we're in? And here is the beautiful love of God for all humanity. We are all sinners. But God demonstrates His love toward us, and that while we're still sinners, Christ died for us. He didn't die because we're people. He doesn't love us because we're good. He loves us in spite of who we are. He is not based on our goodness, but in the spite of our sinfulness. Why is the love of God so important to us? Why is the love of God so important to us? Well, let me tell you. It says this: the wages of sin is death. The penalty for our sinful nature, whether you can say, it wasn't my fault, I got it, it don't matter. The penalty for that is death. But the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. He brought us to the floor we are, but He died for us anyway because He loves us, and He gives us eternal life. Remember this verse? Oh, wretched man that I am. Who will deliver me from this body of death? Paul says, all that stuff I said, how do I get out of this? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. Praise the Lord. See, our self-esteem what we think about ourselves. Our estimation of our value is not based on anything we can humanly measure. In other words, let me say it straight, think differently. You don't get self-esteem by thinking yourself is good because I'm a good person. But it's on the value that Almighty God has placed on us. Amen. This is so important to change even our thinking and our journeys. Because if you don't, you will forever struggle with your image towards God. It's right to feel guilty when we fall in sin. But if we beat ourselves up, we forget the love of God. See? And He has determined that we, those same sinful souls, are worth the life of not a sacrifice of a lamb, but the sacrifice of His only begotten Son. I want to tell you something. Father gave His Son to die and bleed and suffer, not for what He thought were good people, essentially, but for the sinners of who we are. And it wasn't just a sacrifice, it was His own Son. So you now begin to know what God thinks of us. Listen to this. 1 Peter, you were not redeemed with corruptible things, like silver or gold, from your aimless conduct, received by tradition from your fathers, but by the precious blood of Jesus. Nothing can pay for it, nothing can do it, only Him. Should we hate ourselves? Absolutely not. We should love ourselves as much as we love others. I know Jesus said, love others as much as you love yourself. And there's an implication there that we do love ourselves. But it works two ways, too. If we are to love others, we're to love ourselves, too. It's okay to love yourself. Not because you're good, but because He loves us. You have the love of the Father in there. If you love yourself because of the good things you do, I'm sorry, you will inevitably disappoint yourself in the future. Probably tomorrow, maybe even today. Huh? In spite of who we are then, what does God actually think of us? I read some verses. What does God think of us? I want to close with some of these verses here for you this morning. Perhaps the worship team can come back. We're going to go into prayer in a few moments, okay? In a few minutes. But let me read you these things about what God thinks of your old sinful pastor. What God thinks of you, you wretched sinner. It's true. I know the thoughts I think toward you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and your hope. When we have low self-esteem, it inevitably leads us to a sense of hopelessness. I can't do anything about it. That's what Paul was saying. I can't do anything about it. But God says you have a future and a hope because of what I think of you. He says, your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed. And in your book they are all written. God speaking, the writer speaking about God to us. And the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. And then Jesus said, are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. I guess it's not so difficult to keep count of mine anymore, or Michael's. Pastor Temple, yeah. But the very hairs of your head are numbered. Do not fear, therefore. You are more valuable than any of the sparrows.
Hallelujah. Praise the Lord.
Amen. Jesus, we often talk about we decide in Jesus, but look at this beauty. He chose us in Him before He created the world. He chose you and me, that we should be holy and without blame before Him in love, and having predestined us to adoptions as sons by Jesus Christ to Himself, according to the good pleasure of His will. He chose us to become His adopted children. For God so loved the world, He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Worship team, will you come? You see, our conclusion is this. We rejoice, not in our human goodness, which doesn't exist, but in the love of God and an infinitesimal value that He has placed in us. I just can't ever be good enough for God. I can't ever be good enough for you. I can't ever be good enough for me. But He loves me anyway, for all eternity.